Hey everyone, welcome to my stupid video that you guys asked for. One of my least favorite arguments, but most common arguments against the Second Amendment is that the Founding Fathers only wanted it to be applicable to muskets. Current iterations of firearms are obviously vastly more superior than what was around back then. Modern firearms can penetrate multiple inches of solid steel or fire hundreds of rounds per minute. As this technology wasn't around back then, it's hard to guess that they would have wanted any Tom, Dick, and Harry to have access to it. While there's a large difference between a machine gun and a musket, it's not really that simple. People have been coming up with new ways to kill people since the first time some caveman named Ugg realized that if he hit Gork with his fist really, really hard, then he could have Gork's cave and food. Gork responded with a rock. Ugg came back with a mildly pointed stick. Gork then threw a rock, etc. Stone turned to bronze, and bronze in turn turned to iron. Now, iron and gunpowder gave the Chinese hand cannons, mortars, and field cannons. These were all fired by jamming a hot stick into a touch hole. Then came matchlock designs. And then after matchlock came the wheel lock designs, and then after that the flintlock. Now, flintlock at the time was the pinnacle of weaponry, providing the most reliable way to ignite the main powder charge and fire the rifle. So by the time flintlock came along, nobody would argue about going back to matchlock. It was just a stupid idea. Also, nobody would ever say that going back to a bow and arrow or a crossbow would be a great idea. But here's an interesting note. Crossbows were once banned. Like, honestly, not recently or anything. It was back before Facebook and YouTube, probably back before MySpace, and it might have been before electricity or whatnot. But still, the year was 1139, and the monarchies and the church all decided that crossbows were far too powerful and far too technologically superior for the common man to own. This is a fact. We know this. And we also know that just a few hundred years later, when the matchlock came into fruition, that crossbows were rendered obsolete. The Founding Fathers didn't exist in an era where technology was just stagnant. In fact, the Brown Bess musket, the most popular musket used in the war, was invented 10 years before George Washington was even born. Also of note that the Brown Bess was worlds better than any other man-portable firearm of the day. With Europe constantly warring amongst itself, the countries had all dumped tons of money into finding the best way to shoot the other guy. So, how can we deduce that the framers of the Constitution would endorse modern Americans having modern guns? Easy. We'll look at history, which they called now. During the entire Revolution, America had only 64 U.S. ships officially in the entire Navy, and they started with an order for just 13, going up against one of the most formidable fleets in the world. The British were known for their Navy. Now, the American fleet was then augmented by private citizens who had their own military-grade weapons and ships. And this wasn't just someone's crazy uncle showing up with a canoe and a pipe bomb. Over 1,600 private ships were used, bringing almost 15,000 more cannon to America's aid. Their wartime contributions, acquired by looting captured British ships, was a major source of arms and armaments for the colonial army. Without well-armed citizens, the war's outcome could have been vastly different. Okay, sure. The civilians had their own cannons and their own muskets. They were all still single shot and slow to load. How do we know that the framers of the Constitution would approve of multi-shot weapons? That is an excellent question. We know that because they had them. Like I said, a huge amount of R&D had gone into the technological advancements of firearms. Private citizens, inventors, and people who like to tinker were always trying to find a better way to kill people so that they could sell those ideas to government armies and make a fortune. Things like the pockle gun, which was a large, manually operated, revolving flintlock cannon. It held between 6 and 11 shots, all of which could be fired fairly quickly considering the time of its introduction. It was patented in 1718. 14 years before George Washington was born. Also, there were volley guns, which were assemblies that had multiple barrels attached. These were first used in war in the 1300s. King Henry VIII actually had a volley gun built into his walking staff. The knock gun was invented in 1779 and actually saw wide use, although it should be noted that It would also frequently dislocate shoulders, break clavicles, and accidentally set ship's sails on fire. But still, this was in use 10 years before the Bill of Rights was authored. Then there was the Girondoni air rifle. That was in use in Austria's army in 1780. Lewis and Clark took one with them on their excursion in 1804, and Thomas Jefferson was a fan of the rifle. The Girondoni had a capability to rapid-fire 20 rounds as fast as the user could cycle the bolt. So why are muskets the guns that everyone remembers from this era? Easy. They were cheap. Very cheap by comparison. Muskets were simple, inexpensive, and easy to produce in mass. Even though the principles of rifling being the spiral grooves cut into the barrel that improve accuracy, and the use of rifling in firearms had been around for more than 200 years, it was still prohibitively expensive for a fledgling nation or any nation to arm their soldiers with. Suggesting that the Founding Fathers, all of whom were well-educated and well-traveled, were ignorant to the possibilities of advancements in technology is a poor argument. They were not cavemen who stumbled out of their mud huts one day and just found a musket lying on the ground. James Madison, author of the Second Amendment and our fourth president, was alive to see the adoption of percussion cap firearms, which in my opinion is the most important technological advancements in firearms since gunpowder. So let's revisit the original argument. Did the Founding Fathers only intend for the Second Amendment to cover muskets, as that's all that they had? Well, the Revolution would have been lost without armed citizens. Repeating firearms were understood and under development to make them better. Multi-shot firearms had been used for over 100 years. More advanced technologies were well known and just not widely used. And the technology to make repeating powder-burning firearms was only a few years away. It seems pretty safe to say that when presented with this information, it'd be hard to argue that the right to bear arms was just the right to use outdated technology that people associate with our time.